The BMA announces closure of 3 ports due to bad weather. The Electricity Minister, Dr. Josiensu Ramakgopa, says the extradition of Michael Lomas shows government's commitment to tackling corruption. And President Cyril Ramaphosa will arrive in New York today to lead the South African delegation to this year's high-level gathering of the United Nations General Assembly that kicks off with the Summit of the Future tomorrow. It's just gone 12 noon Central African time. A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the Weekend Review right here in the SABC News channel. We are live to you from our studios in Johannesburg, a very chilly Johannesburg at that. In this show, we review some of the biggest stories of the week. I am Sebenzile Nkambule and we are inviting you to participate in the conversation. Give us a ring if you have a view. Our studio line is 011-714-0680, 0681 or 0682. Welcome. We start here this afternoon. The BMA announces closure of 3 ports of entries due to bad weather. Meanwhile, the Road Traffic Inspectorate says assistance is being provided to motorists stranded along the N3 Harrismith in the Free State due to heavy snowfall. The N3 between Harrismith and Tugela Toll, as well as the R617 between Kokstad and Underberg in KwaZulu-Natal, have been closed due to severe weather conditions. What you are seeing there are live visuals of backed up traffic and the incremental weather that we are seeing across the country. Rain and in some parts there, very heavy snowfall. We are, in fact, we do have some reporters on the ground there. As soon as they are settled, we will, in fact, be able to touch base with them to get a sense on what the latest is there. Let me welcome Lishahonolo, who will, in fact, give us a bit more on the weather. Lishahonolo, very good afternoon to you. It's not a good afternoon for many across the country. Give us a sense of the state of the roads. We've been talking quite a lot about the N3 as well with you know, backed up traffic, trucks stuck on the road, heavy snowfall. Give us a sense of what's happening. Good
afternoon and thanks for having me. Yes, I think the system started 2 days before now, with cut-off low being over the central parts of the country, resulting in cold conditions over most parts of the eastern half of the provinces, covering the Free State, Eastern Cape, as well as KwaZulu-Natal. Now, the more severe it was last night, where we see a drop in temperatures over most parts of the high-lying areas of the Eastern Cape, as well as the western parts of KwaZulu-Natal. Now, it didn't just start there. We had now road closures from the Free State to KwaZulu-Natal. Started having reports of what started nice as oh wow, this is snow, this is beautiful, until it got to road closures to people who were traveling to KwaZulu-Natal, especially areas into mountain passes to Bigville, leading to areas Underberg, also in the eastern half of the Eastern Cape, covering Elliot, Buckley East. Now into the evening, resulting into today in the morning, early morning, we saw some snowfalls now over areas in the eastern parts of the Free State around Bethlehem. And as you've mentioned, the entry was closed, yes, but it was also, I think, R714 or areas in R74 that leads from Free State into areas around KwaZulu-Natal, as well as mountain passes from the Eastern Cape. So it was quite much more of anticipated, because we had disruptive rain as well as disruptive snow that was issued a orange level 6, which was quite significant in terms of impacts, with the high likelihood of it happening over most of these areas. Now, it's in the Drakensberg leading to Lesotho, and the question that we've been getting is more of, this is spring, what's happening, why is this? But when you have a system like a cut-off low, it's quite a dynamical system, which results in more of colder conditions, because it's cold core on its own. Now, with this system moving over to the central parts of the country and moving eastwards, with the cold front having moved most parts of its cold left behind the country, it results in a drop in sea level, much more freezing levels, as well as a drop in temperatures, resulting in the cold that we're seeing.
And of course, we are seeing the visuals there of how intense the snow is in parts of the country. The areas that you're speaking of here, they certainly aren't new to snow when we talk about the Free State, right? Very close to Lesotho as well. Has there been, though, perhaps an uptick, if you will, in the severity of the conditions that we're seeing there?
Yes, there has. I think we're in a transition, right, from winter into summer. So the transition then gets to be tricky in terms of people would say it's spring, we shouldn't get such cold conditions. But the system like a cut-off low, it occurs more in the autumn as well as in spring, especially in September. Now, when we have these systems, it's quite a cold core system, which results in a quite drastic and I'd say adverse weather. If it's not snow, you'd have severe thunderstorms. If you don't have severe thunderstorm, heavy rain that might lead to flooding and localized flooding in some areas, as well as some damaging winds. In some instances, it produces some hail in some areas where it might result in some damage into infrastructure. So the areas that are there, you can mention some of the things that assist. They had enough moisture, a drop in temperatures, as well as an escarpment. So an escarpment helps with an uplift of the systems, if it's a severe thunderstorm, it will result in a more adverse and rather severity of it happening, resulting in hail. In this condition, it was dropping temperatures, quite cold, and more rain was seen, but what it had was more moisture. Now, what you need for snow is moisture and a low or rather drop in temperatures, which resulted in this. Now, in it being a transition from a cold winter, especially for the southeastern areas where we've seen the Drakensberg Mountain, they have had snow, but not as severe as what we're seeing right now. But others are saying it's the last kick of a dying horse. But with cut-off lows coming through, we're to see more and more of these impactful weather conditions.
A lot of people seem to have been caught off guard. We were just chatting just before we came on air about the heavy traffic, backed up traffic, and also the heavy-duty vehicles as well, being those most susceptible as well to getting stuck, and of course that causes problems for other vehicles as well on the roads. Should people have been aware of this, or is it perhaps a sense of, it doesn't look too bad, and they take the journey and then find themselves in difficulty along the way?
I mean, the South African Weather Service issued a media release 2 days prior to this happening. And in it was just specifically speaking about disruptive rain, disruptive snow and mountain passes that might be closed, and impact bays warning that was sent through, and not only limited to the Eastern Cape, it was stretching all over to the Drakensberg Mountain into Lesotho. So it would tell you how serious this thing is, and I think in much of the warnings being sent out by the South African Weather Service, it's quite good for us to get it as a public and start implementing it. So if you're seeing such thing as road closures, the thing about snow is that some people also want to have the fun part of it. People want to build a snowman. People want to experience the snow. So when you're traveling, you forget the other part of it, that cars might struggle for you to get to those areas. So it's quite a touch and go. I don't know how to say a person should not go look for snow, but I think in it, just be cautious in doing it, because in such instances, but the ones that you'd be prepared for is if you have a truck that's scheduled to travel in a road that is expected to close due to mountain passes closing due to snow or heavy rain, it's quite good that you take the warning seriously and stop from it.
Let's bring in SABC News reporter Mlondi Radebe, who is standing by in Howick, I believe, to give us a sense of how things are looking there. Mlondi, very good afternoon to you. Give us a sense of where you are and how things are looking there.
Good afternoon, Sebenzile. We are still here in Howick. Sadly, hundreds of trucks have been stopped here in Howick to try and make sure that they prevent them from getting to Nottingham Road, where there is a snow. The provincial government is telling us that all other parts of the province of KwaZulu-Natal, like the Underberg areas, that part is also has got snow, and motorists have been stopped in those areas, in Ladysmith as well as Newcastle. But I will speak to one of the motorists who will just tell us what is the situation, why is he stuck here, where he was traveling. Sibonga kakhulu bhuti ngesikhathi sakho. Sitho siphi igama nesibongo?
Uthulana wakamlifu.
Thulani, mhlawumbe ngasusichazele kafushane mhlawumbe uphumaphi uyaphi ngalesikhathi, nokuthi ukumiswa kwenu lana wena ukubuka kanjani?
Besiphuma besisebenzele eStenga, sesibuyele emakhaya izolo ebusuku ngo11. samiswa ama-traffic cop ngapha bethi kunesnow asikwazi ukuqhubekela phambili sifike emakhaya. So ukuma kwethu lana kube nzima kakhulu ngoba iwedi yabanda nemoto ngene idumiza ubusuku kuze kusekuseni kuphela nodizili omlungu. So sibilewa amakhaza kakhulu ukuze wase.
Thulani usho ukuthi kusukela izolo ebusuku ngo-11 wena umi la kuze kube yimanje mhlambe into yokudla nezinye izinto mhlambe oyidingayo njengomuntu uma ngabe usemgaqweni ngabe mhlambe uyakwazi ukuthi uzithole
ukuthi beseduzane nedolobha laseHowick ebusuku okunye kutholakele but njengama-truck nezinye imoto ebevalelekile abanye abakwazanga ukuthola ukudla sila ngenhlanhla ukudla bese sikulungisile emva kokuthi besichazele ukuthi ngeke sisakwazi ukuqhubekela phambili semakhaya sakwazi ukuzama into yokudla ebusuku sasala sizogada ukuthi umgaqo uma uvuleka sikwazi ukuqhubekela phambili semakhaya.
Mhlambe kukhona i-update abaninikezayo ukuthi mhlambe kungase kwenzeke nini ukuthi nikwazi ukusuka la nikhona ningasemakhaya.
Hayi cha kade sibonele ukuthi sibona phithizela nje imoto zomkhandlu nemoto zama-traffic cop but akaze sithole updates asazi kwenzakalani lokho esilindile ngesukela izolo ebusuku.
Mhlambe iziphi izinto ongafisa ukuyibona benazisa ngazo nokuthi mhlambe banilekelele ngazo.
Mhlambe ukuthi laba abanye abaxayekile bekwazi ukuthola amanzi nanokudla nanokuthi sazi ukuthi so umgwaqo uzolunganini so uzokwazi ukuqhubekela nini ukuhamba phambili sikwazi ukufinyelela emakhaya nalabo abahambela kude bekwazi ukufinyelela labo abaya khona.
Thulani ngibone emotweni enihamba ngayo nigcwele mhlambe nibangake emotweni nokuthi mhlambe nizama ukuyifudumeza ngani njengoba kunje.
Emotweni yethu sigcwele siba u7 but imoto ilayisha 9 khona nempahla ekhona. Iloko esidumisa iphinde icishe iloko idumisa iphinde icishe kusacrifice la awe lodi yaduma amanye amathathi iyacishwa ukuze sifudumale ke senza kanjani ngoba besingaqhokile besingadindele ukuthi kuzoba nalesigameko esisehlakalele.
No, siyabonga kakhulu futhi ngesikhathi sakho.
Ngiyabonga.
Sebenzile, that was Thulani briefing us in relation to the car that they are in, that they are just 7 passengers, but they are to keep warm. They make sure that they start the car and then they use the heater for an hour and then they had to switch off the engine. But that's how the things are for them, and that they are stuck here traveling back home to Ladysmith, of which they are not going to reach Ladysmith as the snow in that area it's bad and the road is closed from Balgowan. There's no other alternative route that they can use to get to Ladysmith, and they were traveling from Durban side to after work going home for the weekend. So it's going to be a long weekend for them stuck here in Howick. But what is concerning is that they're telling us that they are not updated by the officers or the municipality on when will this road be open for them to try and get home. Back to you in studio, Sebe, for now.
Thank you very much. I'm Londi. I'm looking warm. Glad to see that. And there seems to be an appreciation still, of course, joined in studio by Lehlohonolo, who is a meteorologist there. We often speak about some or other phenomena that results in what is unusual weather patterns here. Of course, as South Africans, we do like to preempt spring, and we wanted to start and align with the calendar. Some people know it's a little later on as well. But is there a phenomenon that perhaps we need to be aware of currently that is leading to such severe weather conditions, particularly at a time where it's not expected?
Yeah, I think it is the cut-off low weather system that I'm talking about. It usually happens between, snow in South Africa, as I said, it's received more in August than it would be in September. But with the system like cut-off low, during this transition period, you do get instances. The last that you can recall is about 1981 that we had September having such snow over most parts of these areas, Eastern Cape into KwaZulu-Natal. But we're seeing more and more of these systems moving into the country, and as they move into it, they result in this. So sometimes you'd have a cold front over the southeastern areas with the high pressure system pushing in the east, resulting in more of the moisture in those areas. If you're in Gauteng and most parts of the northeastern areas covering Mpumalanga as well as the low veld, you'd experience more of the low cloud as well as cold conditions. So these are the systems that actually are resulting in this adverse weather.
How long can we expect this to continue for?
All right, so from today into tomorrow, you're still expecting some cold as well as some showers and rain. However, tomorrow you start seeing an improvement, less of the snow that's expected. Temperatures start recovering over most parts of the eastern areas. Will still be cold. I mean, in Johannesburg, you're still expecting the maximum to reach about 17 in Pretoria for tomorrow, which results in just an improvement. Just not that much, but it's improving from a 12 degrees to 17. You can start seeing the movement. Even the isolated showers and rain will just be confined to the eastern parts, covering KwaZulu-Natal, the eastern half of the Eastern Cape, as well as the escarpments of Mpumalanga, where we're still expecting a drop in temperatures overnight over most parts of the lying areas of Mpumalanga tonight. We might still see some snow dropping over those areas. However, it will melt by tomorrow, and you start seeing an open in roads probably in a day tomorrow or the day after.
And what's the advice to road users? Like, be on the road if you absolutely must, but if you can, stay indoors?
I think you've covered it. I think firstly, be warm in these kind of cold conditions. If you have kids, make sure they are at home and keep them warm. Have warm beverages. Keep warm, dress warm. However, don't drive if you don't need to, especially in areas like this, because it's not only snow that's in this area. We also have heavy rains. We've seen more of the accidents that happen due to these rains, especially in the eastern parts. KwaZulu-Natal and the Eastern Cape are quite more of severe in terms of the adverse weather. So most of it is to really be at home. And if you are forced to drive, just keep a minimum distance that allows you to be able to stop just prior to any impact.
All right, we'll park it there this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. Lishakgonolo Thobela is a meteorologist joining us in studio. Remember, you can also jump in and give us a ring on our studio line. Tell us how you are experiencing the cold, the snow, wherever you might be. And of course, stay safe on the roads. We have more for you on the Week in Review on the other side of this. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. To this now, the Department of Labour has embarked on an inspection targeting restaurants this week. This comes just days after a raid on 2 eateries, which were found to have allegedly transgressed several labour laws, including the National Minimum Wage Act. For more on this, we're joined online here by Viwe Mlenzana, who is with the Department of Labour and is in fact the Acting Director General at the Employment and Labour Department, joining us now. Thank you very much, Mr. Mlenzana, for your time with us this afternoon. Can we expect more of these kinds of raids taking place here? And perhaps unpack for us what some of these startling findings were as you raided some of these eateries?
No, thank you very much, Sabenzile. Thanks for having us. Yeah, indeed. We actually have been having ongoing inspections at the workplaces, but we have decided to also perhaps create a bit of a focus in the hospitality sector. And the reason why we have done that is because we had noticed some concerning trends in that particular sector. So for the whole week, this week, we've been focusing in the hospitality industry. And we conducted about 2,000 inspections across the length and the breadth of our country. And yes, we are concerned about what we're seeing. If I can just give you the numbers, about 47% of all the employers that we've seen about 800, over 800 employers, and about 47% of those employers are not compliant with labor laws.
Have you received any, say tip-offs from workers who have in fact unpacked how they are being exploited essentially from working ridiculous hours from the early hours of the morning, late into the night, and not being compensated adequately? We hear of some cases here that they in fact weren't getting compensated by their institution, but only being able to make something from the tips that they get from the patrons at these various establishments.
Well, there are various, complaints that we have received, not only this week, but over a period of time, that were suggesting to us that labor laws were not being observed by quite a reasonable number of employers. Of course, it is important for us also to indicate that it's not all employers, but there is a concerning number of employers that are not complying. So there are issues, the issues are varied, right? So obviously some of the workers are complaining about not being paid minimum wages. Others are complaining about long working hours, and some of them are not being recognized for Sunday work, and there are no contracts in place, and they are being exposed to dangerous and hazardous workplaces. So it's a whole range of them. So what have we found? Against many of these allegations, we actually found that for instance, these employers that we visited this week, about 2,000 of them, none of those that we have visited, and well, let me say a significant portion of those, that about 50% of the employers were not complying with labor laws, whether it is health and safety law, whether it's basic conditions of employment, whether it is restoration with the UIF or the compensation fund, or whether paying people in terms of the minimum wage, in terms of the Wage Act, and also, employment services law are not being adhered to. So what are the implications of this? If employers do not comply with the law, obviously, we're then going to have to enforce the law. How do we enforce the law? So it varies depending on what we have found to be non-compliant. Some of these, they result in fines. Some of these may result into imprisonment. But also equally, though, we've been conducting these inspections with our sister organizations like Home Affairs and others, and quite a significant percentage of employers that we visited are actually employing foreign nationals that are not properly documented. Now, the challenge with that is that the law is very clear in this respect, and it suggests that work occupations that can easily be occupied by South Africans should be given preference to those particular work occupations. Now, for instance, many of these jobs in the hospitality industry, it would be very hard for employers to explain why they don't sort of give preference to South Africans. So these are some of the challenges that we are seeing. And of course, also employers are not necessarily providing employees with proper safety equipment to enable them to work in safe and non-hazardous environments.
We had, in fact, invited the Restaurant Association of South Africa. They agreed to join us, but we, in fact, are yet to get a hold of them. As soon as we do, we'll bring them in on this as well. But Mr. Mlenzana, the numbers you're talking about here, are relatively high, given the number of restaurants and businesses that you went and you visited, and the fact that there are all of these violations that are taking place. What do you believe as the Department of Labour that is a function of? Because this is not the first time we have these conversations about the restaurant industry in particular, and their tendency for some of these businesses to hire non-South Africans because they can pay them much less, and all sorts of other labour violations that are taking place there. Is perhaps the department not monitoring this closely enough, that you have so many of these businesses that continue to take chances and in some cases actually get away with it?
Yeah. So look, I think it's a phenomena that we need to deal with decisively, because clearly here it's not necessarily people that do not understand their obligations in terms of the law, but they deliberately are flouting the law. Which is obviously concerning. Now, as a department, we do have capacity to address these particular issues in terms of manpower. Is it enough? No, definitely not enough. What are we doing about it? Certainly, we are looking at increasing that capacity of inspectors. Currently, we have just about 2,000 inspectors, and we want to increase that to about 20,000 inspectors so that we can then be able to monitor and enforce the law where necessary, as it were. Now, I think there is a temptation from many employers to rather cut the corners, so to speak, by perhaps engaging in cheap labor practices. And what we do notice is that, it seems to us that, it becomes easier for these employers not to comply with the laws where foreign nationals are concerned. And to this extent, we are not suggesting that foreign nationals should not be working in South Africa. To the contrary, we think that where, foreign nationals bring specific skills that are critical that you do not necessarily easily find in the country, of course, we accept the fact that employers have room and the law allows them that to be able to attract that particular skill set. But where we are concerned is that it seems to us that the current practices that we are observing are exploitative in nature and therefore are taking advantage of people that are desperate and they would do anything as long as they can make some semblance of income. So, and that of course, that's concerning.
You say the department needs to be decisive. What do you mean by that? So you've said you want to bring in more inspectors, so capacitating that particular area. But what else? I mean, how do you make sure that the people who've been taking advantage of desperate people who need work and are prepared to take anything and have been taking chances and getting away with it, how do you actually make sure that you put a stop to that practice? We know from this particular raid as well that 2 restaurants in Tshwane were found, in fact, to owe employees a combined 1.3 million rands in unpaid wages. What does decisiveness look like in that regard in ensuring that the wages are in fact paid out to the workers and that the sort of practice is in fact stopped?
So the law provides that if an employer finds himself or herself in a situation where they're not necessarily complying with the minimum wage law, we give them a notification and for them to regularize that within a period of 14 days, failing which then they will then face some consequences. If an employer, for instance, does not comply with health and safety laws, that employer, depending on the degree and the nature of the danger, could actually be prosecuted and then end up in jail, as it were. So, I mean, does the law provide for every eventuality? Currently, we have some gaps in the law, which we are addressing. There are specific amendments that we're working on as a department, particularly in the Employment Services Act, that regulates employment of foreign nationals and also young people and vulnerable work seekers. We are tightening up certain areas there to make sure that the law has a bit of a bite so that there is more consequence that those that are contravening the law can be able to feel.
You mentioned, Mr. Mlenzana, that there were issues of, safety standards, safety concerns as well. That's from the labour lens. I wonder, these are restaurants that we're talking about here, and so consumers go into those places expecting that whether it's the food or the beverages that they're going to consume there are in fact produced, and the right standards are followed and so on. I wonder if that still is within your purview as the Department of Labour, but are you able to perhaps unpack a bit what those concerns were, or was it just from the sort of environment that workers are working in, and perhaps less about the products that patrons go in and purchase?
Well, look, I mean, it's less about the product and the quality of the product. It's more around the safety of the workplace. Give you a couple of examples. For instance, in some of the establishments that we visited this week, the ceilings are falling. In fact, it happened while we were doing the inspection that we had that kind of situation. Also, we had picked up that a number of these establishments are using gas, but some of this gas equipment is not properly installed and there's no certification for it. In other instances, it's the equipment that they're using, whether it's grillers or any of that kitchen equipment. There's wiring that is lying loose and not properly covered, which obviously presents a bit of a danger to the workers themselves. So it's more around the work environment, the workplace itself, not necessarily about the product that they produce per se.
All right. As a parting one, Mr. Mlenzana, when can we perhaps expect some action against the employers in particular from this raid who are found to have violated all sorts of labour laws?
Well, there has been already. I mean, not most, all of the 812 employers that were found not to be compliant, they have been given, sort of contravention notices, all right? And if they don't comply with those contravention notices, then obviously, then there's going to be consequences on them. So the law is obviously, already in motion, where they have been found to have employed undocumented foreign nationals, and some of those employers have been jailed together with some of those, foreign nationals that don't have the requisite documentation.
We'll park it there this afternoon. Thank you very much for your time. That was Acting Director General at the Employment and Labour Department, Viwe Mlenzana. And as I said earlier, we had in fact invited the Restaurant Association of South Africa. They had agreed, but didn't turn up for that discussion. And we do want to hear from them as well. And so should we get that opportunity, we'll get some clarity as well. Let's talk a bit of sports now. The Lions and the Sharks clash in the Currie Cup final at the Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg at 4 o'clock this afternoon. The Sharks are hunting their second trophy in a short space of time, but they'll have their work cut out against the home side. SABC sports reporter Harry Olivier joins me now in studio to tell us about this much anticipated context between these two giants of South African rugby. Very good afternoon to you. What can we expect this afternoon, Harry?
Well, first of all, if we look at, I just briefly want to go back to the history of the Currie Cup. Started in 1892. Western Province was the first winner of the Currie Cup. There were only 4 teams participating in the Currie Cup. And then towards the 70s, the mid-60s, late 60s, 70s, we had Northern Transvaal dominating the competition. In the 80s, it was Western Province. And then these two teams, they came to the fore in the 90s. Now, the competition was very popular in those days. And in the 2000s as well, very popular. But I think with the advent of Super Rugby, it took a bit of a shine off the competition. It doesn't weaken the competition. I just think that there are so much rugby being played. And I think it's a general thing in sport. There's a lot of sport that we as viewers can now view. And we have to make choices. We have to make choices between our money and our time and which sport we're going to watch. So I don't think it's the competition. I still think is strong, but it's just in the crowds. We seem to think because the crowds are a bit sparse when it comes to these competitions, the quality is not as high, but the quality is definitely still top notch.
The weather, we'll talk about the weather and how cold it is across the country as well. What role do you think that's likely to play this afternoon?
I think it would benefit the Sharks a bit more than the Lions because the Lions are used to playing in dry, hard conditions up here at the Highveld, and it's normally an advantage for them. The Sharks, the cold weather is not necessarily going to benefit the Sharks, but the wet weather might. So there would be less ball in play. It's not going to be a fast-paced game. So I think the Sharks might benefit from this cold weather that we currently experience, and we're not used to. I mean, we get up in the morning and it's summer here on the Highveld, and maybe some of us don't wear jackets when we go out.
Yeah, I think a few of us forgot our jackets today. Let's talk a bit about some of the exciting players, some standout performances perhaps that we can expect from the game today. I mean, the Sharks certainly have a star-studded side as well if you think about representation at the Springbok level and so on. Are we expecting any standout performers this afternoon?
For me, in a Currie Cup final, the players that are the most important are the fly-offs for the two teams. And for the Sharks, we have Sia Masuku, who's been brilliant for them. And his goal kicking is also one of his advantages. And we saw in one of the previous games in the wet weather, he was on target the whole time. For the Lions, it's Sanele Noamba. So I think the key players there, those two will be the key players. I remember normally when you're a sports journalist, you go to a rugby game and you sit with the other journalists. So one of the nice experiences I've had in my life was in 2002, where I could just go as a spectator to a Currie Cup final. And at that stage, and it was here at Ellis Park, and Derek Hougaard was the flyer for the Blue Bulls, and he completely dominated that game. So those positions in the final, those will be the key, and I think the winner between those two. I mean, it's a 30-man game, so a lot of other factors will come into account. But if you look at the key players, I think those two will be the key players in the team. But of course, I mean, if you look at, you say star at Sharks team, a lot of, when we're playing Springbok internationals, we lose, some of the teams lose some of their stars or the bigger names. So it's a chance for the lesser known players to make a name for themselves. And also in a Currie Cup final, the pressure of a Currie Cup final, when a coach like Rassie Erasmus looks at this Currie Cup final, he can see which players can handle the pressure of a final. And that's key in any sort of team sport environment.
Yeah, that's what I was going to next, that is it still seen as the stage for would-be Springboks or the next cohort, if you will, to try and get in line? I mean, the country is not short of talent in any way, so do the players see this as some sort of an addition really to be considered? Obviously, the focus for the Boks still with the championship, taking on the Pumas and so on, but this is their chance as well to say, hey, coaches, look at me, maybe consider me when playing the smaller sides in future.
And you're absolutely right. And that's why when I spoke about the history of the Currie Cup, I mentioned how valuable this competition still is. We might not see it in the crowds, but the players that are on display here, I mean, some of the players have come, the Springbok coach Rassie Erasmus might see a player that he needs now, that he feels there's a gap here. In my planning strategy for my team, I need a player like this with these characteristics. A couple of weeks ago, we had a big problem with locks being injured. So now this is the perfect stage for a player that plays lock or any other position. But you understand where I'm going with this. Any other position, if there's a shortage or there's something different that he wants in the team, you're on a stage here, and you can show what skills you have, and especially in the final. I'm emphasizing this again. The final is where the men and the boys get separated. You might be the best player throughout the season, but the pressure of winning a cup is totally different.
We often talk about the movement of players across the world, and perhaps, most notably recently, Sia's moved to France, and then he's moved back home, and so on. Do we see a lot of movement from international players coming, in fact, wanting to play in South Africa? Do they kind of view the local game, or the domestic game rather, competitive enough for them to, whether it's leaving Australia, leaving Argentina, wherever they might be playing, to actually want to come and compete here?
Unfortunately, now we have to go into economics. The rand-dollar exchange, or the rand Australian dollar exchange, that does play a significant role in overseas players coming to play here. I would love to see it. We had instances, we're talking about the Sharks, we had instances where French players came over and played here. But it's not as big of a carrot for overseas players to come and play in South Africa. The quality of rugby that we've got here will improve them tremendously. But in a professional sports era, if you can go and play in Britain or England, France, or any Japan, where they pay significant better salaries for players, then it's a small window for a sports person to earn some money. So they would rather go and play there. But I would love it. I mean, I've always thought about it as well, you know, if we can get some international players to come and play in our system as well. But yeah, unfortunately, the economics of it is a bit of a challenge.
All right, call the final. Who do you think is taking it?
Because of the weather, I'm going for the Sharks, but I've been known to be wrong with these things. So yeah, but I'm going with the Sharks. From, you know, a person that stays in Johannesburg, the Lions, I prefer, you know, I support the Lions a bit, but realistically speaking, I'm going to go with the Sharks just because of the wet weather and because of their fly-off Sia Masuku, who I think is one of the players Rassie could look at in the future. We've got a whole lot of Springbok fly-offs that's currently queuing up. But Sia is also, for me, he's been playing well in this season.
The Boks take on Argentina in a very late game for us at 11 p.m. This evening. What do you expect from the game? We expect we should win. Even Etzebeth is also on the brink of making history as well. How do you think that game will go?
We're playing against a desperate side. Desperate, not in a negative sense. Desperate because they are on the brink, the Argentinians are on the brink of history. They could win the rugby championship for the first time in their history. They've got a very good chance. They've beaten New Zealand in New Zealand. They've beaten Australia. They are a highly unpredictable team and they're playing on their home ground. And it's almost like everything is stacked against the Springboks. But in the last couple of seasons, whenever the odds are against us, we always seem to pull a rabbit out of, it's not a magic trick, but we always seem to come up and win a game. So the Argentinians, the Pumas, they need 9 points from their last 2 games. So it means they have to win either tonight with and scoring a bonus point, scoring 4 tries to get a bonus point, and then beat the Springboks again next week. So it's a big mountain to climb, but they've got nothing to lose, and that's what I'm saying. What I mean when I'm saying they're desperate.
And if we win tonight, we win it, or
yeah, we win it.
All right.
That's all we need. We just need a victory, and we'll be the rugby championship champions.
Well, that's a great reason to stay up at 11 p.m. and catch the game. Harry, let's leave it there. SABC Sports reporter, the Harry Olivier, joining us in studio. That Currie Cup final, the Lions taking on the Sharks, that kicks off at 4 p.m. this afternoon, and the Boks taking on Argentina is at 11 p.m. this evening. You're watching The Week in Review. More after this, stay with us.
I've met a lot of people who've saved on their car insurance with OutSurance lately. But what if you don't save?
You can ask for 500 cash in your bank account just like that.
And did you get the cash?
No, I saved. Even better.
$500 or 1,500 Rand if you've been claim-free and with the same insurer for 3 years. Save every month or get cash. You've got nothing to lose.
Go to outsurance.co.za now for a 10-minute quote that could save you thousands.
When the nights are quiet, Africa and the world keeps its pace. Stories unfold and nations embrace. Late Edition, where silence meets analysts and commentators bring the truth to view. Stay awake with us, for the night's tale never fades. Catch the pulse, catch the day's wave on Late Edition.
Late Edition, every evening from 9 p.m. to midnight, only on the SABC News Channel.
Great, thank you very much for staying with us. To this now, the United Nations General Assembly is currently underway in New York, and President Cyril Ramaphosa will participate in the Summit for Future on the margins of UNGA. For more, we are in conversation with SABC News International editor Sophie Mokoena. Thank you very much, Ms. Sophie, for joining us. Do we have a sense at this point when the president, in fact, will be arriving in New York?
Well, we expect the president to arrive in New York at 15:30 p.m. South African time. And I think he is going to be in New York at the hotel at around 16:30. But we'll have our colleague, Shawan Bryce-Peace, who is going to speak to the president when he arrives at the hotel. He is definitely going to arrive later today.
He'll be participating in that summit for future on the margins of UNGA. What is that particular summit about? What is its significance?
Well, I think the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, realizing that there are so many challenges facing the globe, and this institution, the United Nations, it's not fit for purpose in terms of the current challenges that the world is facing. And therefore, you have to come up with solutions in terms of how do you position the United Nations as a relevant body or institution or platform to address these current challenges. You know that it was established after the Second World War, and therefore, at that time, very few countries were members of the United Nations, particularly when you zoom into the Security Council, where you have those countries that played a prominent role during the Second World War with veto powers. But when you look at the challenges right now, there's a Middle East. You have lots of problems on the continent. But when you look at these countries, they don't have a seat in the Security Council, a permanent seat. We do have Africa on rotational basis, but in terms of veto powers, they don't have that. But secondly, other multilateral organizations, the financial institutions, so IMF, your World Bank, which were also geared towards assisting member states after the Second World War to rebuild, they are now irrelevant. And therefore, the UN chief wants the multilateral system to change. And he has engaged with heads of state, of member states, even before the summit, to ensure that come the summit, they agree on a pact in terms of addressing those issues.
There'll be a notable absence from the leaders of China and Russia. What should we read into that?
You would recall that even last year, the president of the Federation of Russia, Russian Federation, President Vladimir Putin, was not there because of the challenges. You know that since the war in Ukraine, there's that warrant that was issued by the International Criminal Court. But when you look at President Xi Jinping, he didn't attend last year. And this year, he's not attending. Both leaders will be represented by their foreign affairs ministers. Russia will be represented by foreign affairs Sergei Lavrov, and also China, Wang Yi will be there to represent China. But I think these two leaders, the focus next month will be on these two leaders, because you have the BRICS summit hosted by Russia next year, and lots of focus and news are going to come out from Russia. Already, President Putin is setting a tone and also driving the narrative. As you can see that some countries in the developed north are on his case, attacking and criticizing Russia. On the other hand, we have the developing south supporting Russia's position in terms of ensuring that you have a just world. And the same with a powerful country, the second largest economy, China, supporting Russia. And therefore, both of them are not going to lose much. You also have a situation where the US is going to elections. So we don't know what's going to happen, whether President Biden will be there most of the time, or he would also want to bring in the Vice President Kamala Harris, who is the candidate right now. And therefore, I think the focus will be on the developing countries rather than the developed countries.
Of course, there's always the conversation around that conflict. And just a couple of days ago, the UN passing that non-binding resolution with about 124 votes in favor. This is against Israel's occupation or continued occupation of Palestine as well. How do we anticipate that those discussions, those conversations will play themselves out at this 79th session of UNGA?
Well, the focus on the Middle East is still on the table. You know that, as you pointed out, the Security Council, even last night, looking at the situation in Lebanon, because it speaks to the security in the Middle East, and all this happening because of Israel and the tension in the Middle East. And therefore, this will dominate the UN discussions in the General Assembly next week when countries are presenting statements, but also on the margins of the General Assembly, the bilateral meetings of heads of state. I think even President Ramaphosa, particularly South Africa, because you know that that case at the International Court of Justice, it's now about to start with all stakeholders having requested to now present their documents to prepare for oral evidence or oral hearing to present evidence in terms of allegations from South Africa that Israel is committing a genocide, and other developing countries have joined the case supporting South Africa. You also have the developed North, some of them supporting Israel, and therefore the eyes will be on South Africa, on President Ramaphosa. Some will be persuading him to say, please take a more softer stand. Others will say, continue to push ahead so that we find a solution. So much as you don't have these big countries, but I think South Africa will also be an important country to watch at the United Nations as people are engaging President Ramaphosa on the situation in the Middle East. Not only the situation in the Middle East, the situation in Ukraine. As you know that South Africa, President Ramaphosa led that African Peace Initiative, and people knowing that President Ramaphosa has a relationship with Putin. He is also talking to Zelensky. You know, last year at the summit, he met President Zelensky. They would also want to engage South Africa about that. On the other issue, the tensions and the conflict on the continent, in the DRC, in South Sudan, where there's no elections now, in Sudan, where the war is raging on, and South Africa being a strategic country on the continent. You will see many leaders having those bilateral meetings with President Ramaphosa. And also, as we are now again preparing to go to the BRICS summit, South Africa will be there handing over the chairmanship to Russia. And from there, the president, again, the focus will be the G20, South Africa being the only country in the G20, the most powerful group, with the AU now coming in. So between now and December, on the international calendar, South Africa will be very, very busy, ending with that important summit that is the COP29, the climate summit. So a very tough calendar on international front.
We'll watch it very close. We're out of time, but just a quick update on what's happening closer to home in Botswana with the former President Khama.
Yes, President Khama, or former President Khama, arrived yesterday at Siruwe, his home village, and he was welcomed by his uncles and also the people in the village and the elders in the village. Today, just before I came here, he was just about to address the community that has gathered there to welcome him. So later on, Kaya Kumalo and Ditaba Tsotetsi are watching that event, and they will give us an update. But I think it is an important one ahead of the elections in Botswana end of October. And as we speak, the president of Botswana, Mokgweetsi Masisi, is not in the country. He is in New York attending the United Nations General Assembly. He was invited. We don't know. We'll see when he returns back to Botswana whether there will be some reconciliation between the two leaders, or Khama will continue to support the opposition. It's something that we will be watching. But even before we really focus our attention on Botswana, we'll keep our eye there. But the other important elections in few days to come, it's Mozambique, and our focus will be on Mozambique, particularly Frelimo, that is currently under siege.
We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, SABC News International Editor Sophie Mukwena. You are watching The Week in Review right here on the SABC News channel. Do stay with us. We'll continue at the top of the hour. South Africa says it stands ready to encourage engagement towards de-escalation in the Middle East as concern mounts that the war in Gaza could expand to a full-blown confrontation with Hezbollah in Lebanon. The designer who created the world-famous Madiba shirt, Sonwabile Ndamase, has been honored with a citation by the president of the prestigious New York Fashion Institute of Technology for uplifting the creative industry in South Africa and in the African diaspora. In international news, Hezbollah has confirmed the deaths of one of its top commanders and other senior figures in the Lebanese movement in an Israeli airstrike on Beirut. Thank you for staying with us. This is the second hour of The Week in Review, coming to you live from our Johannesburg studios in Auckland Park. I am Sebenzile Nkambule. Very good afternoon to you. Remember, you can participate in the discussion by giving us a call. Our studio line is 011-714 0680 0681 or 0682. Welcome. Let's start here. South Africa says it stands ready to encourage engagement towards de-escalation in the Middle East as concern mounts that the war in Gaza could expand to a full-blown confrontation with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Minister of International Relations Ronald Lamola was speaking exclusively to SABC News ahead of President Cyril Ramaphosa's arrival in New York for the Summit of the Future and the opening of the debate in the UN General Assembly.
The international community has a remedy through the Security Council, which its resolutions must be respected. There is also other tracks that are also important in finding a ceasefire, in finding de-escalation. But I'm happy that the United States is now also leading this process of engagement to find some peaceful resolution to de-escalate the conflict that is currently unfolding. But it will be important that those that are very powerful and who are at a strategic position plays that key role initiating and de-escalating the conflict. And ourselves, we stand ready to encourage engagement, to encourage de-escalation, but also to ensure that we are anti-war as South Africa, but we also want to see parties coming together, engaging to find a peaceful solution, but also to put more resources in this platform of the United Nations in the Summit of the Future and the UNGA.
The designer who created the world-famous Madiba shirt has been honored with a citation by the president of the prestigious New York Fashion Institute of Technology for uplifting the creative industry in South Africa and in the African diaspora. The institution invited Sonwabile Ndamase to present his latest collection, while he is also the subject of a documentary being directed by one of the professors at the institution, where he will also deliver a masterclass to students seeking to pursue careers in the fashion industry. Our Sharon Bryce Pease compiled this report for us.
The citation read out by Professor Judith Gaffney on behalf of the institution's leadership described Ndamase as not just a designer, but a visionary whose work resonated across continents, capturing the essence of African identity.
I say this in the position of the president of this college, President Joyce F. Brown of the Fashion Institute of Technology, do hereby confer this special citation upon Sonwabile Ndamase for his design work that honors his South African cultural tradition and in 2024 for his collection that honors the milestone and celebration of South Africa's 30 years of freedom from apartheid. We celebrate you from FIT.
Viva Nelson Mandela, viva! Viva Mama Winnie, viva! Viva the government of national unity, viva! Ladies and gentlemen, I have absolutely no words except to say thank you, Madam. Thanks, Professor. And I thank you all for tasting some of our creations. The only thing that we'll be asking unto you, please start buying locally made products. By doing so, you are helping our economy.
His designs made famous by the country's first democratically elected and first black president among the world's greatest statesmen, and a creativity and vision that has shadowed South Africa's 30 years of democracy.
I'm smiling all the way. I'm here now today in New York on a different mission, on a different trade mission. This to me means that the legacy of Madiba that I've traveled with, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, that I have traveled with him in some of these trade missions. And now, after 30 years of our democracy, here I am, exposing once again, becoming the ambassador of our African aesthetics and displaying it in an institution like this one, which is FIT.
He says his designs changed the status quo on what was acceptable presidential dress.
It's overwhelming because we changed the status quo, not only in South Africa, in an international arena, across African diaspora, including Europe. All people now are more comfortable in dressing in a Madiba way because they are taking that as the symbol of reconciliation, a symbol of healing the wounds of apartheid. And this is who we are as South African. And I'm quite pleased and proud that I am leading that into the whole entire world.
The organizer, who's also a fellow designer and teacher, explains that this honor was 2 years in the making after their first encounter at Paris Fashion Week.
That night at the reception for the show, when I heard his talk, it resonated with me of how he curated designs even for Nelson Mandela, using colors that would bring vibrancy but yet would stand for unity and peace in a nation. And that's what my brand is about. It's about bringing people together. It's about adding color to a room. And I truly believe that there is color therapy that changes the dynamics in a room. So his story resonated with me. So I said, you know what? It was really put upon my heart, God put it upon my heart that I needed to contact him and start journalizing and hear about his story. So for about 2 years, we've been dialoguing about his journey. And so I decided to put this together and do a documentary. So tonight is a celebration of his designs. He has a new collection, the Legacy Collection. Tonight is a celebration of that. And it's a celebration of him, the journey that he's been on, and to be a designer who endured apartheid and still could dream.
The Legacy Collection, a tribute to South Africa's young democracy, 3 decades on and counting. Shervin Riceby's SABC News, New York.
The SA Communist Party General Secretary Swali Mapaila has again called out the ANC over its decision to form a government of national unity. He was speaking at the Working Class Leadership School 3-day program in Braamfontein, Johannesburg, which was convened by the Chris Hani Institute.
The SACP General Secretary has called out the ANC on their lack of engagement with their alliance partners when it came to the drawing up of the GNU. Mapaila told the SACP that no decision can be taken for them, regardless of what executive orders the ANC puts forth.
The ANC must work to get this thing right, proper. If they don't get it right, there will always be tension. It doesn't mean that, for instance, if we have participated in the discussions, proper discussions on the setup of the GNU, we would have accepted it per se. But at least we would have admitted there's been discussions. They've known our point of view, our differences. But there was not even such. That's the point, and it's a fundamental point.
The GS further stated that a weakening cadre is hindering the fight against monopoly capital, describing capitalism as their strategic enemy.
I used to believe that, our leaders here don't have the political teeth. No, they have the political teeth for capital interest. But they don't have that for the working class. When it comes to issues of capital, they take decisions decisively and urgently. But issues of the working class takes forever.
COSATU president believes that although they didn't ask for it, while there is a GNU, every effort must be made to keep the ANC at the helm.
And whilst we may not have sought a government of national unity and had preferred an ANC minority government as a federation, the reality is we are in a GNU, and we must ensure that it is the ANC that leads it.
Over the next 3 days, the school will discuss the state and challenges facing the South African National Democratic Revolution ideology and reflect on the way forward. Zara Groenewald, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Thank you for staying with us. To this now, South Africa is facing a startling reality. 1 in 7 mothers is a teenager, with some as young as 10 years old. The consequences are dire, with teen mothers more likely to contract sexually transmitted infections or diseases, as well as HIV. According to the United Nations, adolescent pregnancy is a major obstacle to achieving sustainable development goals. In South Africa, it perpetuates cycles of poverty, inequality, and social injustice. But beyond the stats lies a human story. Teen mothers struggle with stigma, social isolation, and inadequate health care. Their future and that of their children hang in the balance. Today, we examine the complex issues surrounding teen pregnancy and HIV. Joining us is Anna Maria van Niekerk, who is with Bhekisisa, in fact, is news editor at Bhekisisa, to give us some context around this issue that Bhekisisa has covered here. Thank you very much, Anna Maria, for your time with us, and welcome to the Week in Review. These numbers are startling, and perhaps we start with the issue of the sexual violence that very young girls are subjected to in the country. Of course, a child under the age of 15 can't consent to sex. So what we're talking about here is at least in most cases, issues of rape.
Yes, and the story that we published in the last week or so, and that's been distributed, and I think that the headline that sort of has led to a lot of interest from media and from just feedback in general is that 1 in 7 mothers in South Africa is a teenager. 365 girls give birth as a teenager in this country. And the statistics this week, just I think the headline seemed to have sparked a lot of interest and conversation around it in the story. And of course, Bhekisisa is about unpacking data. So the research is put together. It comes originally from the District Health Barometer, which is a very, very detailed survey that's done by different health facilities across the country in 52 health districts and 9 provinces. So it's highly detailed and complex information. But we then try to, in our partnership with Media Hack, which is a data collective, journalism collective that tries to unpack data stories in a very simple and accessible way. That's where these statistics and numbers come from. And it's been taken up by a number of our colleagues in the media because it's such a startling headline. And it is, as the researchers we spoke to help unpack it, Peter Barron, one of the authors, and who's also a consultant to the District Health Barometer, labels it a train smash. Literally, for a young girl who falls pregnant under the age of 15, it's a train smash on so many different levels because not only her physical health is affected, but her mental health, her prospects for a future. And it's the one thing that one needs to understand in unpacking these figures is the very important and overriding and all-important context in our country of inequality. It's driven by inequality between genders, between socioeconomic groups, between races. It's different. It's inequality that's driving why young women are in this position.
I think what's particularly shocking is that we're not shocked enough, that it's not the sort of thing that forces us to actually stop as a country to figure out what on earth is happening here. It's almost as though you hear the headline that 1 in 7 mothers are teenagers, and it's like, oh my gosh, and then we continue and focus on other things. What from the work that you're doing and going through all of this data, what are perhaps some of the perceptions that are at play? We're talking about the stigma, and so, but all of this is after the fact. So after now here this young girl is pregnant and there's now a child at play and the stigma associated. But even I suppose before this sort of thing happens, what are the sort of conversations happening in communities, if any? So what is the overall perception around this issue?
What I can tell from the research that I did and the case studies I interviewed in helping to contextualize what's happening behind the numbers. Firstly, young girls fall pregnant because they don't often understand the consequences of sex, even if it's not a violent relationship. They don't fully understand that they've the consequence of falling pregnant, what that means for their bodies. So they often don't report it, not even to their mothers, not to teachers, most certainly. Often don't go to clinics, even if they can afford to go to a clinic or have access to one nearby. For every solution that she would need money to access assistance, she doesn't have that, right? The picture just snowballs in terms of the impact on her body, her psyche, mental health. So sorry, I lost track of your question.
But more around, I suppose we always talk about the role of communities, right? And
yes.
You mentioned that these young girls then don't report to schools, and so I mean that's a community of its own. There may be family dynamics as well that prevent the child from being able to speak about it. And if anything, they're more likely to get advice from their peers who are also ill-informed about these issues.
So some of the experts, another expert who helped us understand exactly what's happening where the young girls are is Professor Zozo Nene, who heads up the Pretoria University Gynecology and Obstetrics and Gynecology units and at Steve Biko Academic Hospital. And she's in fact spearheading as president of the South African Colleges of Medicine, the Department of Gynecology and Obstetrics, spearheading an outreach into communities where this conversation is happening so that they can train health workers on how to receive young girls at health facilities and try and help them before they fall pregnant, obviously, and engage with parents and teachers, because predominantly, even though there are good policies in place to try and keep learners in school and to try and provide sexual health services to young girls, the young girls aren't even getting there because their parents are too uncomfortable to discuss sex with them. The teachers are certainly uncomfortable to discuss sex with them. NGOs who might specialize in doing this kind of work often don't have the resources to reach everywhere where they're needed. So it's a lack of access to all of those facilities. But all the non-medical reasons why a girl might fall pregnant, the social determinants of health, the inequality, all of those factors keep them, in fact, from being able to access the resources that policy might want to make available for that young girl.
Let's talk a bit about exposure then to diseases or to the HIV, for example, here, because the reason why we're talking about the pregnancy, it means that there is no protection being used in non-violent scenarios there, and so the exposure to illness and to disease. What is the data telling us?
The specific research that we unpacked in the story, and viewers would be welcome to look at the specific numbers, but the pregnancy before and after having the baby exposes the young girl to a much greater chance of contracting a sexually transmitted illness or HIV. So that's not a it's a well known fact that of all the people in South Africa who are at risk of having HIV, young women are the most at risk of getting it. So that in her situation, in a very young girl's situation, it's even more amplified, and also the bigger the age gap between the man and the young girl would be, that would be also a factor that could put her at greater risk of having HIV.
Going forward, as we try and perhaps find a way to deal with this issue, what sort of interventions are needed here? I mean, you've spoken about kind of the high-level policy question. We've touched a bit on the role of communities. What else can be done?
So, I mean, a lot of research is done. There's significant research in public health, in education, but the thing is about, and that's why it's important to keep talking and unpacking the statistics, because it's about keeping the young girls in school and having a conversation that preempts the choices, the sexual health choices that they're going to make in their own lives. So the only solution really is to keep young girls in school, and more research and work is needed to implement the policies that the Department of Basic Education, for instance, have put in place to keep learners in school, to get schools to have rooms where girls can breastfeed, like to make it easy for a girl to come back to school and for it to be taken seriously. What the researchers have said to us is that there's no use treating the children as children. They're having children, they're responsible now for these children. So you have to make it easier for them to be taken seriously and given the tools they need to look after their own sexual health and change the conversation before they get pregnant. So that's why these academics and public health officials, all of them are reaching out to multiple stakeholders to make sure that religious bodies, churches, schools, communities have the conversation with girls, boys, men, and change the trajectory, because once a girl falls pregnant and she loses the opportunity to have education and loses the chance to have a job and improve her life, it sets up, the research shows very convincingly, it sets up generational cycles of poverty in her life that would be very difficult to escape.
I mean, there's more to unpack here, but I'm being told we are completely out of time. So we'll have to leave it here this afternoon, and thank you very much for making your way to our studios. I was Anna Maria Fanikirk, who is with Bheki Sisa, looking at truly what is a startling reality here, that 1 in 7 mothers is a teenager in this country. Very frightening. They do, of course, also get more information about this. Thank you to Anna. To this now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has revealed that he has put the national health insurance on ice for the moment. Ramaphosa says the reason for this is that he has met with Business Unity South Africa executives who have raised concerns over the NHI. The president says he has advised the executives to come up with workable proposals and solutions before he rolls out the act. The NHI, as well as the Bella Bill, have faced legal action from many opposing parties.
We continue to engage, and we will see where that engagement leads. And they conceded that, of course, the law has been passed. I have signed the NHI Act. It's now an act of Parliament, and it now awaits implementation. There are quite a number of legal challenges, but we must welcome that there are South Africans who want to talk, and we can never say we're not prepared to talk. So I've said, if you want to talk, please bring proposals on how we can ensure that there's universal health coverage, and also bring proposals on how we can rid this country of health apartheid in the modern day South Africa, so that equality of health treatment should be available to all South Africans. So I said to them, be aware that those are the overriding principles that have led to the signing or promulgation of this act and me signing it. And the National Health Insurance has been in the making for the longest time, was told about 20, 25 years. But then again, we must also remember that it is the World Health Organization and indeed the United Nations that has said various countries should have universal health coverage. So that is what we are now doing. And I continue to urge those who may be opposed to the National Health Insurance to remember that we are not mad. We are not acting out of turn. This is a global sort of advice that we are following. But at the same time, I have said we are prepared to listen to workable proposals that can be put on the table.
Thank you for staying with us. To this now, relief for indebted households and businesses as the Reserve Bank slashed interest rates for the first time in 4 years. The Reserve Bank announced that interest rates have been cut by 1/4 of a percentage point, taking the repo rate to 8% and the prime rate to 11.5%. Analysts believe this is the beginning of a rate-cutting cycle, which will make the cost of credit slightly cheaper.
The MPC decided to reduce the policy rate by 25 basis points to 8% per annum with effect from the 20th of September.
A welcome announcement anticipated by many. This is the central bank's first policy easing since the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The Monetary Policy Committee hiked interest rates by 475 basis points since 2021 and kept them unchanged for the last 7 meetings. On Wednesday, SABC announced that annual inflation for August dropped below the midpoint of the central bank's preferred target range of 3 to 6% for the first time in over 3 years. Reserve Bank Governor Lesitja Kganyago says major central banks have lowered rates because of slowing global inflation nearing targets. He says locally, output is expected to improve in the second quarter, reflecting rising confidence, in part due to a stable electricity supply. The Monetary Policy Committee also anticipates extra spending given withdrawals from the new two-pot retirement system.
For the medium term, our growth projections have once again edged higher. The upgraded forecast is premised on better functioning network industries, especially electricity, alongside broader reform momentum. Because potential growth is higher in the forecast, supply and demand remain broadly balanced, even as growth accelerates. The pace of growth, nonetheless, remains below longer-run averages of around 2%.
In the past, he has spoken about the fact that growth is a thought when they sit down and look at inflation forecasts. But the primary mandate again is around inflation. The lack of investment is a real thing. I think currently at the moment we have seen a bit of pickup and expectations to actually have that improve on the back of some of the things that are happening from a political front.
This latest announcement comes at a time when consumers and households need some breathing room. An example of this is that the repayment of a 1 million rand bond on a 20-year term was previously 10,837, and now the same bond holder for the same term will be paying 10,664, saving 173.
For the average consumer out there, this might be a few £100 extra in their pocket, but we have to factor in that, if a consumer breaks their budget down into its simplest form, and you look at expenses and you look at debt, expenses have increased, as have their debt repayments. Their debt repayments may have stabilized, but they've stabilized at these incredibly high interest rates. And on the expense side, because of inflation, that has just kept going up. So cost of living has risen. And even though it's slowing down, every single month it does continue to increase. So for the average consumer, it might be a few £100 back in their pocket, depending on the kind of debt exposure they have. But is it enough? No.
Economists believe this is the beginning of a cutting cycle which will benefit consumers. However, the Reserve Bank's outlook on future inflation dynamics could affect the extent of further rate cuts. Added to this is another sizable drop in the price of petrol expected in October and the slowing of food inflation. All of this will no doubt begin to have a positive impact on disposable income and consumer confidence. Diabo Seto, SABC News, Johannesburg.
To this now, the Road Accident Fund CEO Collins Letswalo says they are increasingly seeing more matters settled out of court, resulting in 24 billion rands saved in legal costs over the past 4 years. The figure was quoted by RAF Head during a briefing on its 2023-24 performance report. The fund provides compensation for all road users in South Africa in the event of an injury sustained as a result of a motor vehicle accident. To speak more about this is RAF Head of Communications and spokesperson Macintosh Polela, and from the Law Society of South Africa, Advocate Justin Erasmus. A very good afternoon to you both. Let's start with you, Mr. Polela. Your CEO says RAF reduced its short-term debt to about 8.27 billion from 19 billion rands in the past. Is there a belief that this is purely down to cutting out the middleman?
No, not at all. I mean, obviously we have done a lot of measures to make sure that we cut the amount of money that we pay to the lawyers. For instance, in 2019, we were paying 12.8 billion. We are down to 3.8 billion. But it's not just down to cutting out the middleman, as you say. We have a 2020 to 2025 strategy that we implemented, and it is down to a lot of measures that are contained in the strategy that we were able to do that. We are beset by a lot of problems, and hence this strategy was introduced. But to answer your question, it's due to a number of measures and not just down to one matter that is in relation to the lawyers.
So what are those changes, or what are the other matters here that has led to this cost saving?
So what we have done, for instance, quite apart from the lawyers, we have sought to try and pilot a project a couple of years ago where people come by themselves, which is 3% of the people that we have in our books. And one of the things that we did was we went on a backlog campaign to try and make sure that the people come forward to try and settle the matters. But what we've done recently was to have 2 meetings with the Black Lawyers Association to draw up a plan to make sure that many issues or many claims that are clogged up in the system as a result of us not getting all the full complements of documents are done away with by processing them and making sure that we bring them to finality. And chief amongst what we do was to bring out what you call the RAF1 form, which basically boxes you into bringing us the full complement of documents instead of giving us, documents in dribs and drabs, because many of our claims that have resulted in backlog is partly because people, for some or other reason, submit claims and they don't give us the full complement of documents like you would when you, for instance, dealing with an insurance, which naturally would not give you or finalize your claim without getting a full complement documents. And likewise, the Road Accident Fund is not going to finalize your claim without that full complement of documents. So those are just some of the measures.
Let me bring Advocate Erasmus into the conversation, and thank you for your time this afternoon. Perhaps you want to respond to what Mr. Pullela has said, but in addition, the RAF has said that it was made aware of some attorneys systematically underpaying claimants, providing compensation amounts that were significantly lower than what RAF had paid out. Does the Law Society deny that they are, in fact, these rogue elements?
Okay, let me deal with those two things separately. I'm going to first talk about the savings of the fund, and as Mr. Pullela refers to the documents that are required. At the moment, and this is what we believe is a large part of the cost saving, shall we say, is because the Road Accident Fund is rejecting our figures are around about 90% of claims that are lodged. There was a new form that was published called a RAF1 form. It requires... It's always been an RF1, but the new one required a massive amount of documents. That's been set aside by the courts as unlawful. Mr. Pullela well knows that they are appealing the judgment of the full bench of the Gauteng High Court, which set that aside. It said it's unfair, it's unconstitutional to require all of those documents. So there's an impasse where claims are not being lodged. Road Accident Fund simply refuses to accept those claims. And they were taken to court, they lost in court, they're now appealing. I think their chances of winning on appeal are quite slim. But that's obviously if you're registering far fewer claims, you're going to save. Yeah, and that's where the savings lies. Regarding the claims that there are lawyers which are underpaying clients, this is a huge. The volumes of litigation are massive, and there are always going to be a few rogue elements in the system, but they are the exceptions to the rule. The Law Society of South Africa, the Legal Practice Council, all of us want to stamp that out. Lawyers are the most regulated profession in South Africa, and we would welcome the opportunity to work with the Road Accident Fund to identify and eradicate any such lawyers that are taking advantage of the system. But it's offensive to us, actually, that those exceptions are raised out of context, and it ignores the extremely hard work and good work that lawyers do every day for their clients. It's unfair to taint the whole pool of lawyers because of the actions of a few rogue lawyers. There will always be a few bad apples in the barrel. Our job is to get rid of those bad apples, but they are the exception to the rule.
Mr. Pullela, let me ask you to respond to both of those, that the issue of rogue lawyers, if you will, is not as rife, that it's a few bad apples that we're talking to, but then also the point about the RAF1 form, which was introduced in July to improve service delivery and better manage claim risk. Is it in fact doing that so far?
So thank you for the opportunity to respond to Mr. Erasmus. And it's difficult to talk to somebody while we, sit here and we act in the interest of claimant who, act in the interest of their bottom line as the lawyers do. And why do I say that? Let me challenge first the idea that we are rejecting 90% of claims. No, we don't do that. That's a lot of nonsense. But number two, the RAF1 form, there you go. I mean, you have a form, as you would with anywhere where you claim, where you say, we have a problem where you're not submitting all your documents and we want to settle the matters as quickly as possible. And instead of being embraced by lawyers because it allows the claimant to go through their claim as quickly as possible, it is taken to court because as he says, it's it's a lot of documents. It's a big volume of documents. But number two, what I am surprised with is Mr. Erasmus saying that it's very few people who are involved in this scheme of getting as much money as possible. Number one, from the claimants, but number two, from the Road Accident Fund. As you saw recently, we had a case where a mother, guided by lawyers, went to so many practitioners, health practitioners, to try and squeeze as much money from the Road Accident Fund as possible from a toddler who was hit by a car and was discharged at the same day. And so they were, basically demanding 11 million from us. And rightly, the judge told them that they were only deserving of 800,000 rand. So a huge volume of our claims are delayed by lawyers who go to as many health practitioners as possible to try and squeeze as much money from the Road Accident Fund as possible. It's not just quite a few lawyers that try to squeeze out a buck from either the claimants or the Road Accident Fund. It is most of them. The system is geared such that from the lawyer's side, that you get as much money as possible to get your 25% being as much as possible. And that's just the nature of the game. We have stopped 2.6 billion rand worth of claims from our FID, which is the Forensics Investigations Department. Now, if the lawyers are people who are upright, most of them, why do we have to stop much of those claims? And he happens to represent personal injury, and we have the Minister of Health saying those people, because of the measures in the Road Accident Fund, they've stopped fraudulent claims to 3 billion. Now, 3 billions cannot be done by just a drop in the ocean or a small pool of lawyers. It has to be a lot of them.
Let me give you an opportunity, Mr. Erasmus, to respond.
It's incorrect, but I want to deal with where he says lawyers shouldn't try to get the most for their clients. We must. That's our job, to get the most for our clients. It's our job not to fraudulently pack out a claim. It's our job to get proper compensation for our clients. Compensation is it's defined in the Act. Compensation must put you back where you were had the accident not happened. Lawyers have to do that. We're not here to assist the fund. We are here to represent our clients, and we're here to get the clients back exactly where they were before the accident. That is our job. If a road accident fund is unhappy with that, then they are going to be unhappy with that. And I want to raise a point here, because it's an important point, because I believe this is the reason behind the attack on lawyers. Currently, the Road Accident Fund is trying to shift the nature of the Road Accident Fund. It's trying to shift it from a compensation scheme to a benefit scheme. The benefit scheme, if it comes in, will give claimants a tiny fraction of what they get currently. They won't be compensated. They will really be turned into, under the benefit, they'll be turned into SASSA pensioners. And it will be a totally administrative process where road accident victims have their claims the money due to them dramatically reduced. To do that, you've got to take lawyers out the system. And that, we believe, is the reason why the Road Accident Fund has this rhetoric of attacking lawyers. And I challenge Mr. Pullela, if these matters have been stopped, report us. If any attorney's done something wrong, they must be dealt with, and they must be dealt with vigorously. But you can't just make blanket statements about, this amount of claim has been stopped. It's just simply wrong. It's defamatory to the profession, and there's an agenda behind it. The agenda is changing from compensation to a benefit scheme.
I just want to bring in a listener as well who wants to jump in on the discussion. Lucas, you're in Limpopo. Afternoon. Go for it.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Yeah, I got a problem with these ref people. I think somehow they ignore things, or they not doing what they're supposed to be doing there. Because I had an accident at 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And it went on till 2006.
Yes.
And I was paid peanuts. And after I paid peanuts, they said I was going to be given an undertaker certificate.
How much is peanuts, Lucas? What did you get, and what were you expecting?
It was, they said it's 90,000, but then out of that 90,000, they take 30,000 for the lawyers and the doctors where I used to go. And I was given 60,000 plus undertaker certificate. All right, with that undertaker certificate, which the lawyer was supposed to give it to me, the lawyer didn't give it to me. And I took time to get that certificate. I couldn't get it, and I even put the lawyer on that, and I couldn't get it. 2018, then I went to the ref office in GP Street. Then I found a person there by the name of Joe Mumakwe, but I think he's passed away. His life, he rests in peace. So he gave me, I gave him the story. Then he gave me some forms. He said, take these forms and go and fill them and bring them. So when I went back home, something just happened to me. I got sick, and that form, when I came back, the form was lost. So 2019.
Wrap it up for me, please, Lucas. We don't have much time. Where are you now? Or do you have a specific ask for ref?
I'm in Limpopo. Now, since I've been in Limpopo here, because I moved from Joburg to Limpopo now.
Yes.
Now, since I've been here, 2019, I've been applying for that, for that medical, undertaker medical certificate, and I've never been given to it. Every time I phone, they told me that it's been escalated. It's been escalated. So I think these people are not doing their job, and I've spoken to so many people.
All right, Lucas in Limpopo, let's leave it then. Let's get a response for you from Mr. Polela. Do you want to maybe respond to that question? And I know you would have wanted to respond to Mr. Erasmus from the earlier comments. Let me ask that we move from that just in the interest of time. Does actually the case of the caller Lucas from Limpopo perhaps give credence to where you're wanting to move to, that maybe if there weren't lawyers in place that he would have gotten more?
Well, look, I cannot move from Mr. Erasmus without challenging the assertion that if we move to being the social benefit, he claims that the claimants would get a lot less money. No, they wouldn't, because we have decades of experience where we've been using people like actuaries who would say what is, due to the claimants. Now, moving to the caller, of course, we would quite rightly want to deal directly with him, because I think that that relationship, if you cut out the middleman, and the middleman is interested in the 25% and more than 25%. And Mr. Erasmus said it himself, they're not here to help the road accident fund. Well, you're not also here to help the claimants. So who are you helping? The guys are helping their pockets. And then we're going to insist saying that, because we've got many cases to prove that this is true. Whether his personal when he's personally injured his reputation or not, or the institution of the lawyers is injured their reputation, well, I don't care. We're just talking the truth.
I'll give you a moment, Advocate Erasmus. Let me first take Dr. Phil from Secunda. Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, go for it. What are your thoughts or your questions?
My thoughts are, it's actually a suggestion that the RAF should stop paying the money out to the lawyers. They should take directly the account number for the claimant and pay directly to the claimant. Then the claimant will subsequent to that, pay the lawyers what is due to them, whether it's 10 or 15%, whatever amount has been agreed on. That's my take on it.
Thank you for your view, Dr. Phil, on the line there from Secunda. Advocate Erasmus?
Yes.
I thought you would have wanted to respond to Mr. Polela's comment, but also just from the two callers that we've had here, who feel that from their experience, particularly Lucas in Limpopo, that perhaps without the middlemen, without the lawyers, that he would have gotten a lot more than what he calls peanuts. Higwa?
Well, you know, it's unfair to describe the lawyer as a middleman. You know, the lawyer takes on a client to process a road accident fund claim, however you want to do it. It's extremely expensive. Experts have got to be paid. Expert reports are 15,000, 20,000 rand each. The lawyers run up hundreds of thousands of rand in costs processing these claims. They are there with their clients through the process. They're not just simply a middleman that fills out forms to their own benefit. The fees that are allowed to be charged are heavily regulated by the state, and they're fair. The Contingency Fees Act was introduced specifically, it says so in the Act, to increase access to justice for people who couldn't otherwise afford lawyers. That is why the Contingency Fees Act, it's heavily regulated. You have to comply with it. The fees are what they are. That's what the Parliament has seen fit to say your fees shall be. So you're not just a middleman. You can only get so much of the claim, and you have to put a lot of money into the claim. You've got to invest your time, your skills, your knowledge. It takes years to get these matters to court. So to imply that lawyers are just middlemen that are abusing the system is really not fair. It's inaccurate, and it is really the hundreds of thousands of lawyers in this country that do good, solid work in the interest of their clients every day are being tainted by these kind of accusations.
We'll be out of time, Mr. Erasmus. Just a quick one. I understand the Law Society is launching an urgent application challenging changes to the payment measures. What is the status of that, and what will you be asking from the court?
Well, I don't want to discuss an urgent application which is sub judice. It would be wrong of me. I think I should pass on commenting with that. I don't want to deal with something that is before the court.
Parting shot from you, Mr. Polela?
Here's the deal. We've had many, press releases and utterances that are made left, right, and centre about the misbehaviour of lawyers, and in the Law Practice Council recently to say that there are alleged bribes that are being investigated. Not one press release have I seen from the gentleman on these matters. I did check before this, not one. And he's here talking about the Road Accident Fund, and they say a lot about the Road Accident Fund, but much less about the egregious act that are done by the lawyers. The sooner he leaves us alone and talks about the lawyers that are thieving from the system and thieving from the Road Accident Fund, the better. Because then what it does is that they deal with their lawyers and we deal with our systems, and until such time that we get rid of the lawyers altogether, and believe us, we will get rid of the lawyers and they can go and steal somewhere else. Thank you.
On that note, let me thank you both for your time. That was Head of Communications and Spokesperson, Macintosh Polela, and from the Law Society of South Africa, Advocate Justin Erasmus. Thank you very much to you both for joining us. And that's how we wrap things up. On a very spicy note this afternoon. Join us again tomorrow for the week ahead right here on the SABC News Channel 404, where we'll be taking a look at the week that is to come. From myself, Sebenzile Nkambule, and the team from Studio 11, take care.